Well, let's bring our defence and security analyst, Professor Michael Clarke. Zelenskyy describes it as a big shift. I mean, it is, isn't it? You know, this is a man who was, you know, not speaking to Zelenskyy a few months ago, and now he seems to have done an acute 180.
Yeah, I mean, he said 28th of February was that awful meeting in the Oval Office where they beat up Zelenskyy. And they said, you have no cards. You have no cards. You're risking World War III. And now Trump is saying completely the opposite. He said, you have a good chance of winning back all of your territory, by which we assume he means Crimea as well, the borders, you know, right back to 1991. Because when Ukraine was established in its modern form, when the Soviet Union collapsed, it was there were 15 successor states. The Russian Federation was one, Ukraine was another. So in their present forms, both countries only go back to 1991 in their present form. If you're talking about, you know, historical ethnicity, then Ukraine goes back at least 600 years before Russia. I mean, Ukraine is far more ancient and distinguished than Russia as an ethnic group who thought of themselves in a particular way. But these two states go back to 1991. And the borders of Ukraine, the legal borders of Ukraine, there they are, including Crimea. So in 2014, the Russians took Crimea in a coup. It was very easy for them. And then a few months later, they manipulated a problem in the Donbass and then took the Donbass. And that was the situation up to 2022. And then in February the 24th, 2022, they launched what was the full-scale invasion. And that's given them 20% of territory. So from that map there, it goes to that map that we've lived with for month after month. They had more than this originally, but they've been pushed back out of Kharkiv province in the north and half of Kherson down in the south. But there it is. They have Crimea in that area of territory, about 20% of the total. And President Trump is saying, well, you could get it all back. Most analysts think it would be a very, very long time before they would get Crimea back, even though they can keep on claiming it because legally it is theirs. But then the question is, could they push back in some of the other? And that's the big if.
And it also differs markedly from what Trump said even just before the Alaska conference, that Ukraine was going to have to, there was going to have to be compromise on both sides. Ukraine had to accept it wouldn't be able to keep all of the land that it had once had. Yeah,
and that was only 5 weeks ago, the Alaska conference. And Keith Kellogg, who is Donald Trump's envoy in Ukraine, he's very pro-Ukrainian. He's become a real friend to Kiev because he's a military man, he understands the issues. And Kellogg has been saying since before Trump was elected, the Ukrainians will have to give up some of their territory. And there's been a sort of general acceptance that even if they don't give it up legally, there would have to be a de facto acceptance that they won't get that territory back for the time being if there's to be a ceasefire. But Donald Trump seems to be saying, well, carry on the war and you might get it all back. But remember, I mean, what he said was very curious, but the thing he said at the very end of his post, he said, I wish both countries well, good luck, as if he's saying, I'm off. I'm getting out of this. I mean, he's on a zigzag course out of this war, and it's as if he's saying, well, you have a chance of getting it all back, good luck.
I mean, do you think this is marks a real shift in his position, or was he just spouting off last night?
We don't know. It is a big shift rhetorically, of course. And the one thing it will have an effect on is Ukrainian morale. I mean, President Zelenskyy looked very cheerful last night. I mean, it's the happiest he's looked for a long time, and you can see why. And to be honest, I mean, Ukrainian morale has been so low this year because they feel as if the world is deserting them, the Europeans are not stepping up. The United States has basically changed sides in the war, is what they felt. I mean, justifiably. This would have a big effect on the morale of the troops fighting on the front in Ukraine, that they're not on their own. They're not just losing slowly and they're going to die inevitably. There was a sense in which, well, maybe we can prevail to some better output, whether it's regaining all of our territory or some of our territory. And that shift in morale may turn out to be very important. But it all depends on what follows. I mean, is this change in rhetoric going to be followed up? It does seem, the one thing that is, I think, also positive from Ukraine's point of view, is that President Trump seems to have accepted that Putin was stringing him along. He said, again, almost a direct quote, he said, I thought I had a good relationship with him, but that relationship turns out not to count for anything. That was almost humiliating for him to say that, because he believed that he could handle Putin. And, of course, Putin has handled him. And that recognition that he is
the penny
being
has
manipulated.
finally dropped, do you think?
It's the loudest dropping penny in modern history, yes. And I think it has. So his attitude to Putin and Russia seems to have changed, but being Donald Trump, we don't know what he'll think next month.
He also called Russia a paper tiger. They've
they
come
really hate
back and
that.
said, yeah, you know, we're a bear and you can't have a paper bear. Well, I mean, can you have a paper tiger either, really? I mean, I mean, he's so not only has he kind of, you know, wrapped his arms around Ukraine, he's also sort of stuck a middle finger up to Russia.
And he started to say Ukraine have done remarkably well. He said remarkably. I mean, he said that they had no cards back in February. Now he said they've done remarkably well. Again, he reflects the last person who spoke to him. And who was the last person who spoke to him yesterday? Zelensky. And so he's been convinced by Zelensky that Ukraine is inventive, that they've got things on the go. Interestingly, on September 30th, in a week's time, a Ukrainian delegation goes to Washington to talk about joint arms production in Ukraine. The Americans are getting interested now in scaling up all this innovative drone production, which the Ukrainians have gone in for. So the Americans, in some respects, at least commercially, seem to be getting behind Ukraine. And President Trump seems to have been convinced now that the Ukrainians really can fight really rather effectively and that the Russians are rather ineffective, even though they've got 750,000 troops trying to conquer Ukraine against about 500,000 of Ukrainians. You know, the Ukrainians have convinced Trump that they are a cause that could be successful, whereas he didn't think that in February.